faithful politics viewers and listeners. I got it backwards this time. If you are watching us on our YouTube channel, we're there too. I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Burtram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing well, Will. Thanks.
And this week or today, we actually have Dr. Hassan. He is a licensed mental health professional, recognized expert on cults and undue influence, and possesses professional experience both in the U.S. and abroad. His work encompasses various areas, including consultation, coaching, public speaking, media appearances, activism. The list goes on, and he is an expert at helping individuals and families dealing with issues related to undue influence. And we are delighted to have him here today because he wrote a book actually a couple years ago called The Cult of Trump, which you can see over his left shoulder if you're watching us on YouTube. And we are just so delighted to have you. So thank you for being here, Doctor.
Yeah, thank you for your good work.
Yes.
I wanted to meet you. And so when you invited me, I was like, yeah, let's do this.
Are we everything you ever imagined?
I'll let you know after the interview.
That's fair. That's totally fair. So, okay. So how does one get into, the world of cults, undue influence and whatnot? So maybe you can kind of just give us your origin story of kind of what made you here today.
Sure, because I can honestly say I would never be in this weird, arcane, but so vitally important field if I hadn't been deceptively recruited while a college student back in 1974. I was an upper junior at Queens College, a creative writing major. I was writing poetry mostly. By the way, I grew up 1.3 miles from Donald Trump in Flushing, Queens, New York, by the way. So I was aware of Trump as, growing up and his, media shenanigans. In any case, my story is I was raised conservative Jewish, traveled around the world, extra honor student. I love to read books. I love to learn. But I had no interest in joining a group, much less changing religious orientation. But my girlfriend dumped me, and I was starting a spring semester at Queens College, and 3 women flirted with me and asked to sit at my table, and they lied to me and said they were students. And I even remember asking, "Are you part of a religious group?" "Oh, no, not at all." And my dad, who had a hardware store, had taught me, "Steve, you can tell if people are lying by their eyes. If they're lying, it's kind of shifty in their eyes." And these women just were smiling and directly looking me right in the eyes, and no tells that they were lying, but they really were. And I found myself, after a series of things, going to an isolated retreat, which I didn't understand was an actual indoctrination workshop. I didn't have a car. This is way before cell phones, and I was at this held captive physically and psychologically and emotionally for 3 days before they were pressuring me to stay for another 7, at which point I demanded to be taken back to New York City. But they had already put in my head the possibility that God was working and God may be summoning me for the last days. And could I afford to miss my chance to do God's will and save the planet from the mess that we're in? And when I got home, my mom was like, "Where were you? We were worried." And I'm like, "I was upstate New York at this multi-million-dollar mansion, Mom." And she said, "Your eyes are glassy. Were you using drugs?" And I said, "No, Mom, I don't think they gave me any drugs." And she said, "Let's go talk to the rabbi." And I said, "Sure." And he was clueless. No one had heard about the Moonies in February of '74. They only started hitting the media later that year when we were all told to fast for Nixon during Watergate. And I fasted for 3 days on the Capitol stairs as a Moonie. In any case, I was selected to become one of their spokespeople as an American who's 6 feet tall and semi-articulate. and became a fanatic. I was groomed and trained. And I got out because of sleep deprivation and a near fatal van crash in April of '76, which left me in a hospital away from the group, isolated and sleeping instead of 3 to 4 hours a night, 7 days a week, working nonstop for the group. I had weeks of sleeping and lying in a bed. They had given me one cassette tape of father's speech. And I called my sister, who I'd always been very close with, and she was the one person in my life who hadn't said I was in a cult and I was brainwashed. Everybody else were Satan because they said that I was in a cult or I was brainwashed. My sister just said, I miss you, I love you, I don't understand. Like that was her over and over. I miss you, I wish you were here, I want to hug you. I don't understand. So I reached out to her. She said, you have a nephew you haven't met. And this was her words, I'll never forget it. I want him to know his Uncle Stevie, which was the way she referred to me as a kid. And it touched my authentic self. And I said, if you promise not to tell the parents, I can arrange a visit. And she promised, and I arranged a visit, and then she broke her promise and told my parents, and they arranged a deprogramming, and they took my crutches away so I couldn't fight or run away. I was still very angry, and I never would have left, except my father tearfully asked me how I would feel if it was my son who met a controversial group and disappeared, and what would I do? And because he had a tear, it got to my authentic self. I was sure he was brainwashed by the communist media against Father and the Messiah, 10 times greater than Jesus. But I saw he was genuinely concerned. I was a mess. I wasn't able to do anything for the group. So I said, what do you want me to do? He said, just listen with an open mind. And then if you go back, at least your mother and I will be able to go to sleep at night knowing we did the responsible thing. So I wanted to prove I wasn't in a cult and I wasn't brainwashed, that I knew what I was doing. And I found out that I had been subjected to Chinese communists' 8 criteria of Robert Lifton mind control, and that Moon was a liar and therefore not a man of God, as I had been teaching the divine principle, which is his Bible. And then I just felt insane. I felt so ashamed and embarrassed and confused, and I had prayed for hours every day to God to lead me. I truly believed with all my heart that I was doing the right thing. And there I was with 3 ex-Moonies, one of whom I had recruited and who had left previously, crying and going. And that led to me wanting to understand how they did it to me. And I started talking to Robert Lifton and other experts, and they're like, to be honest, Steve, we just know the second hand, and what you're describing is so much more sophisticated than what we studied in the 50s. You should study psychology and explain it to us. So from there, I never imagined I'd be doing this as a life thing. I thought I'd just be working for a couple of years to expose the Moonies cult, because I didn't know there were other cults. I just knew this one was really bad. And it went from there. I was asked to be an expert for a House congressional investigation into the Korean CIA and the Moonies. Then Jonestown happened, and it was like one thing after another. I was like, oh my goodness, there are all these other cults, much bigger, So here I am, 47 years later.
Here you are, and here we are, and we get to ask you questions about this, which is amazing. What an opportunity. I'm truly and genuinely excited about being able to talk with you. And one of the things that stuck out to me is you're talking about the communist, like, brainwashing techniques.
Chinese brainwashing of Mao. Correct.
Of Mao. Okay, so I just to give you some context, I have a really small church. I'm a pastor, but it's a small church, and we have been accused from time to time of being a cult because we're so small, and because we meet in a house. Essentially, those are kind of the two reasons. So, does that qualify us as a cult that we're small and meet in a house?
What? No, so in my work, and I've been using undue influence a lot more because it's a legal term for unethical influence versus brainwashing, which is not a legal term. Although I did my doctoral dissertation research connecting the dots with all these brainwashing theories and trafficking law, which is illegal, fraud, force, or coercion. But the way I think about it, if I may, I don't know if your YouTube can see my influence model, but it's on my website, freedomofmind.com. And I talk about ethical influence that's healthy, that respects your authentic self, is love-based, compassion-based, using your conscience, creativity and humor, critical thinking and free will. People can be in healthy cults, meaning it's a group of people, a culture, all the way over to authoritarian mind control cults that create a dissociative disorder or a pseudo-self, like the Moonies. Like I went from Steve Hassan, son of Milton and Estelle Hassan of Flushing, Queens, to Steve Hassan, son of Sun Myung Moon and Hak Ja-han, the true parents of the universe. And so it created this disorder. My real self was still there, but the cult self took over and suppressed me. Well, how I like to describe it is like computers get hacked. You deceptively click on the wrong link, and it takes over your operating system of your computer. There's a similar kind of phenomenon where people get deceptively recruited and their minds get hacked, like a mind virus. And so back to answering your question, I didn't finish. I got off on a tangent. But for me, these unethical cults use what I call the bite model of mind control. I look at behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. And the more of those four attributes, both are on my website, by the way, freedomofmind.com. The more of them, the more authoritarian a cult it is.
That
but
makes
size
so
has
much
nothing to do with
sense.
it. There are one-on-one cults where a person is controlled by a single other malignant narcissist that isolates them from family and friends and takes over their life and
Oh my goodness.
tells them they can't think for themselves, that they have to do exactly as they're instructed. So size has nothing to do with it. I also think China is a cult, political cult. Russia's a cult. Authoritarian cult, I should qualify.
An authoritarian cult. And so that's kind of where I'm leading. So the Trump of cult, it's like a, I know we're talking to you about more than just that, but it's like, it's this hit. Like, whoa, what do you mean a cult? I mean, I voted for Trump in 2016, and I didn't in 2020, but was I subject to the cult? I guess make the connection for me between your classical cult, say Jonestown, right? When everyone will say, hey, that's clearly a cult. They killed their children, then they killed themselves, and they didn't
start that way.
But it didn't start that way.
So
yeah,
if you think about it, most Republicans voted Republican. They weren't voting because they loved Trump or thought he was God's choice. They did as they have always done, and they were following their peers.
Yes.
I call those folks fringe members. It's the people who think God is using Trump, and as it turns out, and you've told me earlier before we started recording that you've done things on the New Apostolic Reformation churches and mega churches. Well, these are the authoritarian cults where the leaders say they can talk to God. God told them Trump won in 2020. and
Right.
that people have to be covered by their spiritual power and grace, otherwise Satan will invade them and they'll be possessed by demons. And don't believe the media, because that's all fake news. That's satanic. So people are following a prophet, or a prophet in air quotes, or an apostle, not following Trump. They're told, well, God is using Trump like King Cyrus. You know, he was a sinner, but he was a bully for God, so he's more like that. I heard even Netanyahu say those words, which I put in my book, that
Wow.
Trump was like a King Cyrus. Super weird. But in any case, if you can't think negative thoughts, if you can't feel free to criticize the leader, the doctrine, or the group, these are warning flags. You're not in a healthy religious group. A healthy religious group validates if you have questions, say them, ask them, demand proof, look for scripture, look for, ask to see the financial records. They say, oh, you can look at them anytime. Well, ask and then see if you can actually look at them, or they give you a runaround or make you feel guilty for asking. So there's a lot of telltale signs that I'm hoping anyone that listens to this beyond this, interview, we really have a very clear criteria to evaluate healthy and not. And I can tell you, I belong to a Jewish community temple for 25 years. If someone wants to leave and go to another temple, or says, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, we say, stay in touch. Good luck. We'll miss you. That's it. It's not, if you go to that other church, you're damned for eternity. You want to go to another shul, you are committing a sin. It's like, no. The whole Abrahamic religions, all of them, no matter how you understand the Garden of Eden story, Almighty God didn't brainwash Adam and Eve to be obedient slaves. So however you want to interpret Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, the major metaphor is God, Almighty God. This is part of the design, if you will, or God isn't almighty. God wants us, his children, or her children, if some people think of God as a her or together. If that was the plan, then, there are problems.
Yeah, so I'm curious about kind of the evolution of thought to get to the cult of Trump, and I'll be honest with you, and I've said this on the show before, that we've spoken to a ton of people where we're like, we don't get it. Like, it seems like Trump has his own quote unquote cult of like personality, and he's got his own following, and no matter what sort of metric we apply, none of them really seem to explain what we see with a lot of his followers. But when we apply sort of the cult moniker or label, it all makes sense. When you were like, okay, the way that they're behaving based on our limited understanding of what a cult is, like, that makes sense, but it seems very, I don't know what the word, politically incorrect to say that a bunch of people are, part of a cult. And, like Clinton said something along those lines about, having to be deprogrammed. And I thought that was a very apt comment, but obviously, she's, whatever Clinton says, it just throws fuel to the already Trump.
Yeah, she's satanic, and she kills babies and drains them for their blood. An old anti-Semitic Russian trope, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Protocols of the Elder of Zion. Yeah, so what I want to say is that when my book agent recommended I do this book, I said, no, I don't want to do this book. It's going to alienate everybody who are following Trump. And he said that the people who are following Trump aren't going to read your book anyway, Steve. You need to educate everybody else. And honestly, I thought about it a lot, and then I started with the understanding that the stereotypical profile of destructive cult leaders is malignant narcissism. It's a term that Eric Fromm coined. It's more than just regular narcissism. By the way, narcissism is on a spectrum, and there's a lot of people with narcissistic tendencies, but they have a capacity to empathize. It's this inability to truly feel for others' pain, to step into their shoes and imagine what they're going through. That is characteristic of a narcissist. But the malignant narcissist includes the psychopathological dimensions, thinking they're above the law, pathological lying, threats of violence, sadism, paranoia, fear and harassing, inability to trust even friends and allies. So you can go through the whole list. And when I applied it to Trump, he hit his words just were every single one of those. So I thought to write this book, I'm definitely doing a chapter comparing him to my former cult leader, Sun Myung Moon, Hubbard of Scientology, and Jim Jones. I could have added another 10 famous former cult, authoritarians, but I thought 3 was enough. But as I started going into the research, and Frederick Clarkson was very helpful, Andre Gagne was very helpful, I got a lot of help from other people who have their own areas of expertise. I really came to understand the historical movement over decades, including my former cult, it turns out, the Council for National Policy, which I only learned about after the book manuscript was submitted, but my group was involved with the Council for National Policy. In fact, someone from that council was the founding editor of Moon's newspaper, the Washington Times, which was one of the biggest disinformation channels in the United States, far worse than Fox News over time. They've been at the Center for Climate Science Denial for 50 years, according to David Lipsky. In any case, I'm going off on a tangent, but what I'm trying to convey is when I started thinking about all of these special interest groups that all were collaborating to support a Trump presidency, that's when the book really came to fruition in my mind, and it was clear to me that Russia was involved. And I put Putin at the top of chapter 7 of the puppeteers of Donald Trump. And I don't agree with pundits who talk about him as a genius or a mastermind. The guy's an ignorant person. He doesn't read books. He's not interested in learning, but will follow instructions if he thinks it's in his best interest, that he'll make money or have more power or stay out of jail or whatever. So we can go into Russia, but the key thing I want to say that's different from my recruitment into the Moonies is digital media and manipulation. And if you have same model. So if you have a minute, I'll tell you a true story about a counterterrorism meeting I was invited to at the Aspen Institute in the summer of 2015. It was convened by Rich Stengel, who was then counterterrorism of the State Department, his assistant, Anne Marie Slaughter, Richard Haas, Madeleine Albright, Walter Isaacson, a lot of major people, Monica Biggert of Facebook, Scott Armstrong from Google. And the question was, how is ISIS so successful at recruiting online? And so everyone had input. I was the cult expert in the room. But why I'm telling you this story is that a a technologist presented his supercomputer. This was AI-driven supercomputer in August of 2015 that could monitor all internet open source communication in real time in 20 different languages. And he put Madeleine Albright's name in the search filter, and we could see everything she posted and everything in 20 languages people were saying that used her name. And we were like, whoa. And then he proceeded to talk about how they could track memes, meaning stories that were circulating on the internet. And he talked about a strategy to intercept memes from ISIS that were gaining traction by diverting people to a different story that would disrupt the flow of the development. And he talked about basically confusing command and control. Long story short, that unit was never leased or purchased by the government. And I got to be friends with this man. I said, you know, there's a presidential election next year. What are you going to do? This is really powerful stuff. He said, oh, Hillary's people only want to give us $10,000 a month. I can't pay my people for that. And I said, are you going to like go to the dark side? Because at that point, Trump was already like gaining traction. And he said, I don't want to, but I have partners. And then he went dark, and then he sold the company. And I'm 1,000% convinced that what has been happening is AI-driven digital platform manipulation. And this was before I wrote about the Mercers, Cambridge Analytica, hacking Facebook, all of the above. But if you can get data on people's minds and have AI and supercomputers, like when I was a Mooney recruiter, I had to ask you, tell me about your family. You know, did your parents divorce? Someone have a drug problem? I wanted to find out like who you were. And we had a 4-part model. Are you a thinker, feeler, doer, or believer, as a way to hone in on people to suck them into the Moonies. But now it's all super with algorithms and AI. And I'm told that there are 5,000 data points on every voting American. And
5,000 data points.
5,000, meaning every like, every dislike, what you eat for food, what you drive for a car. You know, how many children do you have? What are your hobbies? What grades did you get? Like, seriously, major profiles on people. And we have no data privacy regulations in the United States, which means it's legal for people to gather this data and sell it to third parties. So I did a blog about a group in Colorado called GLOO, Gloo, that is looking for people who have mental health struggles. They're Googling about drug addiction or suicidality. And they're selling this data to bad churches who are wanting to suck vulnerable people in.
Right.
This is the age we're living in now. And as I see it, there's no solution to this polarization, psychological warfare that's going on that doesn't include psychoeducation of every citizen. Hey, it's your mind.
In the United States.
You need to protect it. You need to teach your family members, your friends, your congregants how to protect themselves, how to discern what's true, what's a valuable, trusted source of information, to disregard things that sound off the wall, because they probably are. Right. We need to educate people about deep fakes. We need to educate people that they can take 3 seconds of your voice, and scammers can use your voice to call your parents who are elderly and say, I've been in a car accident. Quick, send me $3,000 to this number. And a lot of elderly are getting scammed because
Oh
they
my
just
gosh.
need to get educated. This is the world we're living in
This is
now.
what we live in.
And that's my worry for the next election. It's not
Absolutely.
normal times, and China and Russia do not want Biden to win. They want the election deniers to win. They don't want gun regulation. They want Americans to shoot each other. Why? They can tell their people, look at those stupid Americans. We keep you safe. They don't
Yeah.
protect their own children in schools. They want us to
Yeah.
fail, right? And they've co-opted
Yeah.
politicians and media. So we have to encourage people. Human beings we did not grow to being on digital environments. This is a new thing
Yeah.
for our brain, and we're getting our brains rewired because people are on these platforms 8 hours a day, and they're not with their
Yes.
real people in nature, with children and their
They're not really
pets.
getting their brains like
They're getting
used
their brains
to,
rewired, Josh.
rewired by social media.
I,
So
I interviewed a
pushing,
social psychologist who wrote a Harvard study on this, and he
that's
says
wild.
keep your children under 3 off of all screens. I said, Carl, you mean
Whoa.
like TV is bad? Yes. Children
Everything.
need humans. That's how mirror
They need
neurons
people.
work. People, we're organ, our
Yes.
organisms are wired to being human, not to being digital artificial
Right.
avatars.
That makes sense. And, when you're talking about the BITE model, behavior, information, thoughts,
And emotional
and
control.
emotional control. So take that model. I mean, so much of what you said, my mind's like spinning because I'm like just thinking
I
about
talk
all the
fast. Sorry,
implications.
Josh.
No, it's all right, but all the implications of what you're saying, and it's amazing and it's so far reaching. But how? So when we're connecting it, like say to Trump, all right, how is that BITE model used through social media? Like how, say I'm just a regular person, I don't know a lot about cults or anything, I don't read a lot or whatever, I'm just kind of your normal American that maybe reads a little bit every day but probably
Right.
hasn't read a book in 5 years.
Right.
So how does this model actually take me and bring me to someone who says the election was stolen? It doesn't matter what the liberal media says. They're making it all up. It's all fake. The Ukrainian war is fake. There's space lasers starting, they're starting fires in Hawaii and in Canada. How do I get from just a regular person to that through this BITE model? How does that happen?
So, to answer your question, I suggest you come to freedomofmind.com and look at my BITE model analysis of QAnon, because I look at QAnon not as a conspiracy theory, but an actual online cult that was then protesting on the streets, or what is called 4th generation psychological warfare to 5th generation warfare, which is getting people indoctrinated online and then to be in the real world and go to Comet Pizza with a gun because you're going to save the children in the basement who are being
Yes.
trafficked without there being a basement, but it just being a test psyop. So I want to start with a few quick social psychology teachings, if I may. One is we're born as babies and we have to be socialized to adulthood. The law says we're an adult when we're 18 or maybe 21, but neuroscience says we need to be 25 or 26, and some people even take longer than that till their frontal cortex, their ability to think and analyze for themselves, is developed. So let's start there. We are kind of hardwired to follow authority figures that we trust. So if there's a choice of trust or not trust, if it's your congressperson or senator or it's a media pundit that you trust and they say something with certainty, we have to exert effort to not go along with it. We're also hardwired, because we're social beings, to adapt to our environment. And if we're adapting to followers on the internet or even in our local town, and everybody's saying the sky is purple, the tendency is to say there's something wrong with me. It looks blue to me, but everyone else is so certain it's purple. Maybe I need to see my eye doctor and have my eyes tested, rather than we're hardwired to adapt to our peer group. And I show my clients the Ash conformity study when I'm doing psychoeducation. This was first created in the 50s. They would have a placard with a sample size line, let's say it's 2 inches, and 3 lines, a 2-inch, a 3-inch, and a 4-inch line. And they'd have 9, 10 people in a room, aside from the person at the front. And they'd give the correct answer. They'd say which line matches the sample line. Is it 1, 2, or 3? They do it correctly, and then everybody would give the wrong answer. And the subject, who is in seat 6 typically, was then faced with the dilemma: do I answer what I can see with my own 2 eyes, or do I conform to what the group is saying? And this has been replicated tens of thousands of times. 2/3 of the people doing this test start giving the wrong answer.
That's
2/3, and almost no one gets out of their seat and measures, which is really what I teach my clients. That if somebody is saying 1 + 1 = 3, of course, reality test that one, because it ain't.
Reality test it.
There's real math that actually can answer that question.
Right.
So I want to just state that the error that everyone's walking around with is called the fundamental attribution error. It's the single most important principle of social psychology. And what this says is that people, when they're trying to understand why other people do what they do, they overestimate the dispositional variables and underestimate the social influence variables. So why did Steve Hassan get into the Moonies? He must have been weak. He must have been stupid. He must have not had a good family. He must not have had a good religious education. Steve thought he was really smart, because he was, but he was a little wet behind the ears because he was 19. He was lied to. He was love bombed. He was taken to an isolated place, sleep deprived, hypnotized. Phobias were installed. So that's the education. If anyone's walking around listening to this thinking it could never happen to me, that's your number one first vulnerability. Like, have humility. You're a human being. You can be tricked under the right set of circumstances, unless you're inoculated. If you really are inoculated, using the virus metaphor again, if you meet a former member, learn about how cults operate, that there's deception, learn about what questions to ask, know to never join or commit initially, no matter how much pressure you're under, step back, talk to trusted family and friends, and do independent research, then you're going to 90% and know about malignant narcissists. That's another critical inoculation tool. And so again, coming back to the how to understand. First, look at yourself, look at your upbringing, look at your family, your friends. Were you did a friend try to get you into a multi-level marketing thing? Was a former boss a malignant narcissist and was making people work overtime and not paying them and exploiting them or making them feel guilty? Like, look in your own around yourself and others, and then start learning about how authoritarian cults operate, because there are millions and millions of people in mind control cults in the US and millions of ex-members who have left because they couldn't stand it anymore, but they haven't done their homework to really get it out of their heads. And so they're very vulnerable to getting recruited by the next authoritarian cult.
Yeah, I guess what would you say to people, that would argue, okay, well, that doctor doesn't know what he's talking about. I voted for Trump because I really support everything he does. He's just whatever. He's just speaking his mind. It's no different than you Obama types, that were sort of fanatics over him. So I guess, what I mean, obviously, I think we should have probably just said up front, anybody that, not everybody that voted for Trump or believes or, wants Trump to be president again probably fits into sort of a cult mentality. But
well, I would push back a little bit, because at this point, people have had direct experience with what he says and how he contradicts himself. So in my best predictive mind, people have a lot of doubts. The question is there a tipping point where they can entertain the idea that maybe he's not a reputable person, that he does fit the stereotypical cult leader profile, that he doesn't care about the average person, that he does support Vladimir Putin over our own intelligence agencies, for example. But everybody has their own points. And so what I want to say, importantly on this podcast is that what doesn't work ever is attacking the leader, the doctrine, or the group policy directly, or arguing with facts. Don't you know that Trump has been indicted 91 times for da-da-da? It's like, that is not going to help somebody step back, feel reassured, encouraged to reflect and change their mind. What works is a respectful, active listening, curious. I'm curious. You seem like a very grounded person. You're from my community. You do this for a living. You do that. You're a parent. Help me step into your shoes. Help me understand how you came to believe that Donald Trump is a worthwhile person to run the United States of America. Can I ask you, what's your first memory of Trump? And when I ask people that, and they really stop and think, and you have to give long periods of silence for people to think, they'll often say, I saw him on The Apprentice. Or I read about him in the tabloids.
The Simpsons.
Or The Simpsons.
The Simpsons predicted that he was going to be president. Do you remember that? They actually have a scene of him
I don't, but
being
I
nominated president.
I predicted he was going to win too, just because the media gave him $2 billion worth of free publicity, because they kept amplifying Trump with all of his
He's good for ratings.
Yes, because the mind can get programmed, In any case, so asking people to go back in time, and they'll say, I thought he was a jerk. I thought he was a braggart. I thought he was a bully, or whatever. And then you go, that's interesting. So reflect back and tell me when you actually started taking him seriously as a political figure. and really
Interesting.
encourage them to reflect and think about things. You can switch topics and say, I'm curious. Are you in business? Yes, I am. Would you ever
Mm,
consider going into business with someone who was a liar?
mm.
Of course not. You think I'm stupid? Of course not. Of course you wouldn't want to. How would you know if someone you were thinking about committing to was a liar? Oh, I'd look for evidence. I'd want to know. Uh-huh. So you're
Mm,
eliciting real life criteria.
Situations.
Yeah.
Yeah,
mm.
Like,
Oh, that
that's
who would you
fascinating.
trust? Someone who lies all the time or someone who lies a few times, gets caught, and apologizes? Which person would you be more likely to want to even think about
yeah.
being
So kind
involved
of
with?
in that same vein, like does does a cult leader have to be intentional about what it is that they're doing? Because like when I think of Trump, I don't necessarily, and maybe it's wrongly or incorrect, you know, I don't see him like being three steps ahead, knowing that what he's doing is going to corral his folks to storm the Capitol,
Yeah, I
you know?
interviewed Scott Adams of Dilbert, who said he was a fifth generation, he thinks 5 steps ahead. And he also called Trump a master hypnotist, which I something that I'm an expert in reality, unlike Scott Adams, who took a 1 week course. Um, no, so in my book, The Cult of Trump, I talk about him growing up with authoritarian parents, inculcated with Norman Vincent Peale's Power of Positive Thinking, which set him up for thought stopping, which is a mind control technique. To answer your question, Josh, I got diverted to the bite model stuff.
Mm.
But I
It's all
mean,
right.
there are specific things where healthy people are accountable, they're responsible, they are trustworthy, and things like that. Um, so information control is absolutely vital, and being told, don't trust the media, fake news, or only our channels are good and everything else is bad. That's called information control. That's a big red flag that you're being mind controlled. I
Hmm.
believe in having friends with different perspectives and entertaining.
Of
Maybe
course.
maybe there are space lasers. Where's the evidence?
Yes, I'm totally open to any
Who
of these
exactly? I'm
theories.
open. Convince me that aliens have actually come to Earth, and I will believe it. Everyone that I know and trust in the world of astrophysics, and I have a few friends, say there's no evidence that's responsible at all. Um, I have a friend who imaged the black hole
Hmm.
who's at Harvard. He said, statistically, Steve, the universes are so vast. The idea that we're the only intelligent life is ridiculous. There's got to be other intelligent life. It may not be carbon based, may not be humanoid, but you have to be open minded. But the idea that they care about this one little planet and this one little solar system that's like so irrelevant to everything else
Right.
is kind of sad. Um, but coming back, I want to also talk about phobia indoctrination because it was such a
Please.
prevalent use with the COVID pandemic and the vaccines.
Yes.
And I want to say that we are wired to survive, and we're wired to pay attention to bad news that might affect our survival. So we'll be extra alert to anything that smacks of the possibility that it could impinge on us. The thing, though, is that we need our frontal cortex to evaluate, is there actual danger, or is it a phobia that someone is saying with certainty? And are we giving extra power to them instead of trusting our own gut and our own critical faculties and abilities to reality test? So I was taken as a Moonie in 1974 to see the Exorcist movie, and there have been two major retakes of that movie recently. But we were taken as Moonies to see the Exorcist movie, brought up to Tarrytown, where Moon personally said God made the Exorcist movie. This movie is a prophecy of what will happen to you if you leave the Unification Church. And I can look back at my recruitment and indoctrination at the moment when I stopped allowing doubts in my mind because I was petrified of being possessed by demons.
Or maybe going to hell.
And I didn't believe in demons before meeting the Moonies. I didn't believe in Satan, and I didn't believe in hell either. So, but I was then so afraid to think anything that wasn't in alignment, that was part of my indoctrination. And when people are told, you know, so-and-so had a bad reaction to the COVID vaccine, they're going to exaggerate, and it may have been a bad reaction. But the thing about vaccinations, when you're vaccinating tens of millions of people, is it does cause harm in a few numbers of people. But almost everybody is okay, and it actually preserves life and prevents serious illness. But you have to use your reasoning ability to go, wait a minute, is this a legitimate fear or is this a phobia? Who's telling me this information? What are their credentials? And the thing about science is that there are hypotheses, and then there are challenges by the scientific community. Does that really hold water? And is there a better explanation instead of yours? That's how we've evolved to be such, technology advanced species, because we have science. That's how people are living to 100 instead of 30 years of age, or 40 or 50 years of age, is because of medicine. It's based on the scientific method. And we need to use our critical thinking as we move forward in this next period of time until we can get, hopefully, the legislation to protect our minds and to protect human rights and our liberties and the separation of church and state, which Mike Johnson was involved with getting rid of that boundary or that protection. And the founders didn't want to be England. They wanted to separate, to protect minorities, and we're in trouble right now because there's a dominant set of bad actors who think they are doing God's will, and they want to subvert everyone else to their way of being.
Yeah, I want to. I feel like I could talk to you for at least a good another hour, but I want to be sensitive to your time. But can you maybe unpack, to the best of your ability, some of the terms that you mentioned in your book, like unfreezing,
unfreezing, changing, refreezing.
Yeah, and then explain them kind of in the context of how Trump uses those things.
So this was a model from Kurt Lewin and Edgar Schein's book, Coercive Persuasion. And basically, unfreezing, think about it as disorienting your sense of self, confusing you, overloading you with information, sleep depriving you, subjecting you to hypnosis, things that make you doubt that you know what's true and what's real and who to trust. That's what's known as unfreezing. Changing is the indoctrination of the new pseudo-self, and refreezing is the solidification of the pseudo-self. So the Moonie me over the real me. And the pandemic has sent, because it isolated people, put them online more. People were so supercharged to be mind controlled, unfortunately, and more and more reliant on social media platforms, as well as regular media, radio, talk radio, and pundits, etc. And So the critical thing I want to say to people is we need information to make good decisions, and you have to really step back and take a time out and say, what are my values? Do I want to not do to others what I don't want done to me? Do I want to do to others what I don't want done to my mother or my sister or my brother? Like, let's go back to the golden rule. Let's go back to love. To quote Jesus, and forgive me for telling a ministers, but he said, as you do to the least, you do to me.
Yes.
To the weakest, the loneliest, the sick, the elderly, the immigrants. Take care of the lowliest, you're taking care of me. That's the opposite of the cult of Trump religious people who are like, I'm the elite, I'm chosen, we are special, Judgment Day is coming, so God's going to wipe out all of the others so that we can reign. It's like, no, you don't get it. You don't understand the fundamental values message of Scripture. Open the tent for people who are hungry and need drink, as the Abrahamic tradition. Hello? But this hate polarization and the psychological warfare has gone to the left and the right to polarize, to confuse, disorient everybody. And we need to step back and really recalibrate what is important to us, and we need to be able to turn off our cell phones and our platform use and reconnect with people that we know and love and spend time with them. Hang out with children. Do it for the kids. The next generation is depending on us old fogies to be responsible. You know, we need to not act as if, well, it doesn't matter what happens to the climate because God's going to remake the whole world. Well, is that really what is taught? I don't think that's not my understanding of Scripture.
No, and it wouldn't be my understanding either. And I'm so fascinated by this entire conversation because so much of it in my mind comes down to just basic skills and critical thinking and saying, you know what, just because someone says it's true doesn't mean it's true. And I think that is so important. And of course, it's becoming ever more important as we're looking and seeing families split in half. I have personal experience of this to some level. Families split by Trump, literally, by who likes and doesn't like Trump, which is ridiculous. But I'll be quite honest with you. I feel like in my own story, this started, right? I became fully aware of how much people can wed their politics and their religion when Obama got elected, and I saw my friends, and I'm a very conservative evangelical, but I saw my friends like saying things to me that I was like, how can that be true? How can like Obama has concentration camps in Minnesota, and he's trying to get everyone and put them in concentration camps, or re-education camps like they have in China or whatever. I'm like, that's crazy. So what?
But
this
they
is
project
such an important issue.
They project, what. The Democrats are doing a coup attempt. Wait a minute.
Yes,
who is storming the Capitol with violence, attacking our police?
And the more that we think about it, the more we think about something and think it's like and contemplate on it and think it's true, it will become even more real to us. And we will become even more apt to want to defend it or to, and so it's ever more important that we have correct beliefs to begin with, because
I would argue a little different. Josh, please forgive me, Pastor Josh, but
absolutely.
I think having taking the baseline of, I want to change my mind. I want to learn and grow and not
that's good.
have the same beliefs I had 10 years ago. I want to
Sure.
expose myself to other points of view. And I want to not lose my values or lose my grounding, but I want to separate my ego from my beliefs. And that's what I say to people in all types of cults. I'm like, hey, if you're so certain that what you're doing is right and your leader is right, please convince me, because I'll join. I don't want to do what's wrong. Please help me understand your point of view. But I help them understand social psychology. I help them unpack, how they are trapped in these little thought bubbles. But I did a TEDx talk. I'm going to need to wrap up soon, unfortunately. But I did a TEDx talk, how can I know if I've been brainwashed? And I created a 4-step reality testing plan for yourself. Because, I didn't believe I was brainwashed. That's what I said to my dad. I know I'm not in a cult. I know I'm not brainwashed. Yes. So the first step was what happened with me. But in my case, I was in a hospital. Don't go in a hospital, but take a time out. Disconnect from the media completely, at least a week. Sleep, eat, walk in the woods, play with your pets, listen to music, read scripture. All that is fine. But just take a time out. Let your brain have a chance to reset, because too many people are sleep deprived also. Then step 2, learn the models of authoritarian brainwashing. So I talk about Lifton, Singer, and the bite model. Then I say deliberately seek out ex-members and critics. Because if you're in a mind control cult, you've been told to automatically disregard or denigrate any former member as an enemy, as a traitor, as less than. But I'm intelligent. Let me find out why they left, if they were a devoted follower or a leader. Let me read what the critics are saying and really use my critical faculties. Is there evidence of what they're saying? And it connects with the bite model. Good. But then the last step is to be honest with yourself. Go back in time to before you got involved, knowing this, and ask yourself, if I knew then what I know now, would I have ever gotten involved? And if the answer is no,
that should tell you something.
If, Josh, you said you voted for Trump in 2016. If you went back to you before you pulled the lever in 2016, knowing what you know now, do you think you would have voted for Trump?
Probably not, although my reasons at the time...
I'm not asking your reasons at the time. I'm talking about being in the present, because you're wiser.
I probably wouldn't. No.
And go back to the younger you that got co-opted. I'm going to use that word. It may not be true in your case. You may have just been being a Republican. But basically, the point is that we need to reality test. And we need to also reality test as we're making choices going forward, because there may not be any really great choices. There may be less bad choices on who we vote for. But we have to really use our critical thinking and not just follow what other people are telling us we should be doing, but really with our conscience and with our sensibilities. And if you're religious, pray. What really that I can live with, that I won't feel badly after the fact if I make this choice or this, and know that we all make mistakes. We make the best decision with the information experiences we have at the time, but the critical thing is to learn from our mistakes. I am inoculated from mind control cults by being in a mind control cult. No one's ever going to get me. They may con me for a week by lying to me or whatever. Nobody's going to make me throw out my poetry and betray my family and my country again. I can assure you.
That's so good. This has been such a fascinating conversation. Steven, thank you so much for being on the show today with us. It has been such a pleasure and an honor. And I know I speak for both Will and I when we extend our genuine gratitude for you coming on.
Thank you for your good work. And
Absolutely.
we'll be in touch, because I really feel like we need to have more people of faith speaking up for morality and for goodness and for love and for truth and for reality testing.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and if anyone's listening to this, please come to freedomofmind.com. I have a free email you can sign up for. I have a podcast, The Influence Continuum. I have a blog with the video from Riverside FM in the blog, and I have 4 books, 3 of which are in print: Combating Cult Mind Control, Freedom of Mind, and the Cult of Trump.
Well,
And
yes.
and we'll work together for democracy and freedom.
Yes. I was going to say, I mean, I definitely want to connect more about this and how and I'm sure Will would love to know how we can be a part of the solution, and then the solution even beyond what we're doing. But we're looking forward to that. And
Great.
For all of our listeners and watchers, yes, thank you.
Thanks for having me. Take care, guys.
Yes, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Very
Bye.
good.